We need to get past this psychological block that America has placed in our minds. It says you can't learn. If you're white, you shouldn't value Black history. And it does the same thing for everybody else. I think we need to individually take it upon ourselves to say, I'm going to dedicate myself to learning more about this that's other than me. And Black History Month can do this.
Welcome to Among Neighbors, a podcast about race, power, and privilege. I'm Andy Conti, Director of the Center for Media Innovation at Point Park University. And as always, I'm joined by Barbara Johnson, the Vice President for Race and Gender Equity at YWCA Greater Pittsburgh. Barbara, how are you?
Hey, Andy, I am great. Getting tired of this winter weather.
Yeah, well, today we're talking about Black History Month. And, there's the Chris Rock skit about it being the shortest, coldest, and perhaps, this year at least snowiest month of the year. So
I never thought about that. We got a cutoff month. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Fewer days than the rest. Well, before we get into today's guest, what do you do to commemorate Black History Month? Does it mean anything special to you? Do you do anything extra?
So I remember vividly, one of the jobs that I had at the time that Black History Month first started to be a thing, I had to really fight hard to get that organization to even think about anything related to Black History Month. Mm-hmm. And so fast forward to today, and the wisdom and experience that I've had in all my years of living, I say to people, as a brown person living in America, I'm Black history every single day. So no, February doesn't mean that much to me.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. And I that's going to be the interesting part of today's conversation. The other little bit of research I did, I found a quote from Morgan Freeman saying the same exact thing, saying he didn't want a Black History Month because he felt like Black history is American history and we should be celebrating it every day.
I agree. And I also think the thing that, so I do appreciate February because it is also a time for people to be very intentional about lifting up those people who have been strong in Black history, but whose name never gets told because of the top three that, curriculum experts have decided to feature in every textbook in America. So, so aside from those three names, February is an opportunity to really think about some of the other people who definitely were trailblazers in the work.
That's the one thing I was going to say, that it does allow us as Americans, and particularly as white Americans, to be intentional about saying, okay, we were going to set aside some time to recognize Black mm-hmm. history. Not to say that it's not part of American history, because obviously it is, but to be intentional about it. So maybe there's some value in it that way.
Yeah.
So we're gonna, instead of us just kicking back and forth, let's bring in the expert today. We've got our special guest is Samuel Black, Director of the African American Program at the Senator John Heinz History Center. Sam, welcome to Among Neighbors.
Well, it's nice to be here.
Great to have you, Sam.
Thank you.
So what do you think about this question we were kicking around? Is it better to have a month set aside for Black history, or should we be striving to have Black history every day and celebrating it every day?
Well, I think the important thing is to look at the evolution of Black History Month, which will get at the answer to that. When Carter G. Woodson initiated Negro History Week in 1926, one of the reasons he did it is that he wanted to infuse more of the facts of Black history into the education system. And seeing that he was somewhat powerless to do that on a national scale, he initiated Negro History Week as a way of enriching and a way of focusing, just in February, of focusing on Black history. And he encouraged schools, churches, community centers, social organizations, all these aspects of the Black community to recognize Negro History Week and to focus on Negro history. And over the years, it grew into 1970s. I think it was 1972. It was promoted by the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, at that time called the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. to extend it from a week to a month. And so since then, it's been Black History Month, and it's always been in February. And the interesting thing is that it has evolved, it has grown, and it is celebrated all over the world. It's not just an American thing anymore. You know, there are groups in Japan and in other parts of Asia who recognize Black History Month in February. You know, so it has really taken off um, close to 100 years now. But it's still, you know, focused on its meaning to infuse, you know, what we know and understand in our um, common or popular knowledge about Black history, but it also has extended to the academy as well. And you're starting to see a greater impact of Black history on the academy.
I appreciate what you said, Sam, about when you first started talking, you talked about facts. And I think that that's one of the things that I like to think about as well whenever I'm doing some research is to really um, recognize that much of the history that we have learned that should be inclusive of Black history, we are sometimes facts are not 100% correct, and sometimes there's information missing from that picture. So again, I appreciate the fact that February definitely is a time for people to think about how we can be intentional about making sure the whole story is told and that the facts are out there.
Yeah, exactly. You know, Carter G. Woodson was a historian. He was a Harvard trained historian. And facing racism, and one of the aspects of this whole thing of Black History Month is the fact that it exists for one reason, and that is that racism exists in America. And that the history of people of African descent was not infused in the education system. And this is something Carter G. Woodson, being a teacher, knew and understood this and was trying to find a solution to that problem. And he also felt that for African Americans alone, that if they knew and understood a lot more about their history, then they would find their place in the world. And what I mean by that, and what he meant by it, was that people who don't know themselves are people who are not going to be respected, you know, in the world. And he felt that one of the issues with racism is that African Americans were not respected. And if you knew and understood your history, then maybe that could alleviate the racial issue that people faced. I mean, he's a Harvard PhD, but yet he wouldn't be hired by any university in this country other than African American universities, HBCUs. He taught for a time at Howard University, and then you know, was an independent researcher for most of his life, and starting the Association for Study African American Life and History in 1915. It was a way as one for him to have an opportunity to publish his research. So he's continued to be a scholar, although he was sort of barred and discriminated against by colleges and universities in this country. You know, so the fact that, you know, the history is there, and all Woodson wanted to do was to present it to us, and he developed this platform to allow Black history to be presented to the American people, and now it's presented to the world.
To me,
Right.
it sort of seems this discussion seems sort of similar to the one that we had as a country after President Obama was elected, and this idea that now we lived in a post-racial society and we could move on. We didn't really need to talk about race anymore. But then, of course, we've seen over the last 4 years that that couldn't be farther from the truth. We still have so much work to do. And so while on one hand we might talk about, well, yeah, we need to celebrate Black history every day, it seems to me like there's still value in saying, well, we're going to take time to set aside this month and be intentional about talking about Black, you know, the impact of Black people on our American history and culture, and just all the different ways that it's been impacted.
Yeah, I think racism definitely is a key piece to think about, because if you look at the trajectory of race in America, you know, while the system of slavery ended, I would say that there are so many systems that were, integrally connected to that system that have not completely gone. They've just been, they look differently. And so there's a lot of that oppression that still exists. And so, you could also think about the history of that Black History Month, that if in fact having a Black president changed all that, then we shouldn't have to have a Black History Month still. And so, the little nuggets and kernels of growth that we get, I think, are definitely uh, I can't think of the word, but racism definitely has an impact on allowing that growth to be at a greater rate and be much more exponential in terms of outreach to people who need to hear and want to hear.
Sam, what do you do anything special for yourself or at the Heinz History Center for, obviously I know
Well,
you do stuff, so what do you do?
yeah,
Mhm.
this is an extremely busy time of the year for me. Because of the nature of my job and my position, the fact that I am a historian of the I like to call it Africana history, and so yeah, I do a lot in terms of personally and professionally. The work at the History Center, we have our own programs, Black History programs, and then I'm caught up on, to do some lectures for organizations outside. And then as personally, I have two kids, so we try to do things that are representative of Black history. I try to infuse it in them, as a cultural thing, but also as an educational thing, because a lot of times their schools don't address it, other than maybe a couple of programs, and even especially now during the pandemic, it's really hard for the schools to even do that. So I try to do things that, I used to, when I wasn't as busy as I am now, dedicate to reading a book, a certain book during February, a book or two. But I'm just loaded down with so many projects that it's still related to Black history. But at the same time, I just like to encourage people, to enrich their own knowledge of American history and world history by looking at what is going on and what has happened in terms of people of African descent.
On that point, if you thought the way people commemorate the month is different depending on whether they're Black or if they're white, I mean, are there different responsibilities, do you think, in the ways people should approach the holiday?
It's kind of hard for me to answer that. I must be honest, I haven't paid much attention to how white people celebrate Black History Month, other than those that are within an integrated type of celebration, which is usually what takes place like at museums or organizations and that type of thing, schools and that type of thing. But I would have to say, at least from what I scantily know, I don't think that there's much of a difference. I think it still follows the pattern that Carter Woodson tried to establish, which was that time be set aside to focus on some aspect of Black history. And it could be, programs. I think back in the 20s, a lot of the schools would do plays, these pageants, um, and talk about historic figures in Black history. You see in the media, a lot of broadcast media try to do programs that are representative of Black history. They may show more movies on TV that are focused on Black history. Um, I've even seen Jeopardy has infused more categories related to Black, and all that's good stuff, and all of that is really what Carter G. Woodson wanted. And if it happens enough, then it becomes part of the regular thing and it grows outside of February. And for me, someone who is a historian of African American history, I guess I'm a little different because everything I do is related to Black history all year long. And so it's not like February is something special. It is in a sense that, the History Center, um, you know, has patrons and constituents who expect that, and so we highlight those things that we are doing, whether it's programs or exhibits or publications that we do related to Black history.
Yeah, when I have two sons and they are in their late 20s. And when they were little, I remember vividly that in Pittsburgh, it was very hard to find children's books that had pictures of Black and brown children in them or that were by Black and brown authors. So I was very intentional. I'm pretty sure it wasn't just during the month of February, but all year round, to really seek out and do some research on those books that I knew my kids would enjoy as children. And then the other thing that I know I did do probably during Black History Month was I would donate books to the kids' schools' libraries because I noticed on the bookshelves of their classrooms, there were no books of kids that looked like them as well. So that was one way that, as a mother, I felt very intentional about making sure that, that they were aware of those kind of resources and the kids that went to their school as well as their own teachers. So that was one thing that I thought about when you mentioned, books and having children.
Yeah, a few years ago, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, my daughter was a first grader, and her first grade teacher asked my wife and I about, whether she had her own books, and I said, "Yeah, she has a lot of books, children's books, and they're mostly related to, they're written by Black authors and stories about Black children or Black history." And she asked if I would share that with her. So I actually made an inventory of my daughter's book collection and shared it with her first grade teacher. But that was the first time any teacher had actually asked me, that type of question. So, being a parent, part of the struggle, being a parent and being a historian, my wife is also a historian. Um, and for both of us, I don't want to say we expect our children to do exceptionally well in history classes, but they have no excuse. But at the same time, we expect the teachers to teach American history. And what I mean by that is you teach the history of everyone. And we have had situations, one of my major focuses is on the Civil War. And you can't teach the Civil War and don't talk about Black people. And so this is the type of thing that Carter G. Woodson was trying to address with Black History Month, is that you can't talk about the Revolutionary War, the founding of this nation, and not talk about Black people, and not just those who were enslaved. But you can't talk about Washington, D.C. and leave out Benjamin Banneker. You can't talk about the American Revolution and leave out Crispus Attucks. As a matter of fact, you can't talk about any of the major wars, from the Revolutionary War, Civil War, Vietnam War. Each one of those wars, the first American killed in those wars was a Black man. And very few people even know that or even think about it. So that's when you say that Black history is American history. You can't talk about the Civil War without talking about, the Black people who were impacted, and involved in that conflict.
Can I ask you, so I think this is where a lot of white people get hung up on these kinds of moments. Was it helpful to you when your daughter's first grade teacher asked you those questions and asked you to compile the books? Or did you feel like, she should have already known this and it was a dereliction of duty? Was it offensive in some way?
I felt that she probably already knew it because she asked the question. She wanted help, in a sense, someone who could, validate whether she was on the right path or not. And so she wanted to know, and some of the books that my daughter has, the teacher was already familiar with them. But what she was looking for was a greater bibliography
Mhm.
to be able, resources to be able to go to in order to teach her students. And that's, I think that it goes both ways in terms of education. Parents' involvement is not just the involvement and the concern of their own children, but it's also all the children in school. And so when a teacher says, I need some help with this, can you help me? And that's what we did, was sure, we'll share what we have. And she was so grateful for it. But the whole thing is, for us was that, how refreshing is that? That, we don't have to worry, whether our daughter or our son is going to learn about themselves and their own history, through the school process. It was a lot different for myself because I started out in a segregated system. So I had Black teachers, a Black principal. Everyone in my elementary school was Black, from the janitor to the principal and all the students. And I went to Frederick Douglass Elementary School. So
And where was that, Sam?
this was in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
And so for me, it's a lot different than the experience my children had. You know, I mean, there's something to say for segregation, which was a bad thing overall, but being separate like that, it allowed Black people to do what they felt was most important in order for them to advance. Um, and they built things in that segregated system. I really learned to appreciate Black history way back in the 1960s at Frederick Douglass Elementary School. That never left me. And so, yes, I do feel a little bit that my children, didn't get that type of enrichment that I had. And so to have a teacher come and say, I want to use more literature about Black children in my classroom. Can you help me? And yeah, so that was most refreshing.
Good.
I had another example, Sam, similar to that. I was doing a workshop, and one of the participants in the workshop was a grandmother. She was white, and she said to me that her grandson is mixed race. So her daughter married a Black young man, and they have a mixed race child. And she said to me, everyone in her family, her extended family, treats everyone the same. This was a workshop talking about racism. And so she said to me, do you think that I need to worry about my grandson? And I said, well, he's brown in America. And so, yeah, like the fact that everyone in your family treats him, one way doesn't mean that that's going to happen once he leaves the family environment. And I believe her grandson would have been around 4 or 5 at that time. So then she asked me what she could do. And I asked her, does your daughter and son, have books that show pictures of brown and Black children in the books? And she said no. And so she asked me if I would be willing to give her a list. And so I still have all my kids' books. So I went up to the attic and opened up the box and literally like wrote down all the titles because, this was a boy. And I thought that many of the books that my sons had, he would enjoy too. So, and she was extremely grateful and thankful. So I think that, and it was like this year or last year. So for me, I was surprised that people still don't know. And so again, same as you, I was also, honored to be able to share that with her. I think that it's going to definitely help her to at least start to think about that as she moves forward with her grandchild.
Mhm.
You guys shouldn't be astonished that there's still so much white people don't know. So that's
Yeah.
still a lot of learning to be done. So yeah.
One of the things that I often reflect upon is that public libraries are great resources.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe I take a little hard stance on this, but I find no reason that people cannot learn about other people because you have this resource at a public library. You even have the internet now, so it makes it even easier to learn. I'm a documentary watcher, and I watch a lot of documentaries, and my family laughs about it or makes fun of it and everything. But I find it as a tremendous resource because um, in a matter of seconds, you can download something and learn about an ancient civilization or whatever. So the opportunity to enrich yourself and learn more is there at our fingertips. Um, it's just we need to get past this psychological block that America has placed in our minds. It says you can't learn if you're white. You shouldn't value Black history or Asian history or Latino history, or any other history or Native history. And it does the same thing for everybody else. And so I think we need to individually take it upon ourselves to say, and Black History Month can do this, you know, um, uh, to say that, I'm going to dedicate myself to learning more about this that's other than me. And I think that that goes a long way into breaking down these barriers that we have, which are really because we don't really fully understand each other, and therefore we don't trust each other. So those are artificial barriers, and we need to get beyond those barriers. I mean, it's easy for me to say that because I work in a museum, I work at a history center, and so I'm exposed to this on a daily basis, and I realize that everybody isn't, and a lot of us in this country. I mean, we can go a large chunk of our lifetime without ever having a relationship with someone who's different from us, and to me that's a sad commentary, to be in a country like this that is so rich in so many different things, and still you can find racial isolation there. It reminds me of the story that came out, I think, last week, where a school in Ogden, Utah, decided to give white parents an opportunity to opt out of having their kids taught Black history. And I said, wow, that's here we are now in 2021, but it doesn't really matter what year it is now. But the fact that you still find that there is no academic value to learn anything about people of African descent. And that's a very deep seated thing about race in our country. When once you discover all these things, you discover that America really wouldn't exist, even with the positive things that we see in our society today, if Black people weren't here. So there's a lot to learn, and Black History Month attempts to do that.
There's a theater group out of Washington, D.C. I'm not sure if they're still around, but it was called Pinpoints Theater, and they did a play. It was a comical skit called 10,001 Black Inventions. And they actually did a skit where they showed, just a normal Black family's life. And then they did they shut the lights off, and then they came back on and they did the same skit with no Black inventions involved in this family household of, of just a day in the life of. And then at the end of the presentation, they passed out books that had 10,001 Black inventions, listed in there. I learned a lot from that. One of the things that I thought was funny related to what you said, Sam, is my colleague who is white, we co-facilitate workshops together. And there oftentimes, because she is so entrenched in racial justice work, she always asks her husband, who's white, she's white also, and she'll ask her husband if he knows something, because she's so entrenched in the work that she doesn't realize what the everyday person doesn't know. So she just assumes, even as a white person, that all white people know this, but then she'll ask her husband and he'll be like, no, I don't know that.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with not knowing.
Right.
being a historian of African American history, I wish people would recognize the fact that I don't know everything about Black people.
Right.
They think
We
I
all
do,
don't.
So, and they expect me to be able to give them an answer in 1 minute or less or whatever. You know, but once you begin to just research, you'll find that there are so many sources
Hmm.
on Black history or some aspect of the Black experience. You had talked about inventors, and I hope you can see this. I know
Oh
the writing
yeah,
is backwards or
nice.
whatever, but it's called Black Inventors, crafting over 200 years of success. And it's basically the author's name is Keith Holmes,
Mhm.
and he compiled, for each state in America and mostly throughout the world, different inventions by people of African descent, and in different categories, from agriculture to things made of wood. I mean, it's just a fascinating book and a fascinating read. And then once you go through something like that, and you find out, wow, uh, the little thing, what do you call it? You put in your windshield on the sunny days to block the sun to keep your dashboard from getting hot. That was invented by a Black man.
What?
Part of the elevator system, brake systems on trains.
Too
Uh,
lasting.
you can go on and on and on and on, and these thousands of inventions that have changed our lives and impacted our civilization. And this was what Carter G. Woodson was trying to get at. This, Black people are not left out of this. We've contributed. It's
Mhm.
just that what we have contributed hasn't been acknowledged and valued enough to teach the next generation about. And so, although he started off small with a week and focused basically on Black communities, it has grown internationally, and it is manifested in such a way that it has impacted everyone, and you don't have to be a K through 12 student, anymore. You can be an adult, and there's all types of things that um, help celebrate and recognize and acknowledge and appreciate Black people and their history.
Thank you for talking about this. And I think it's always the hardest part of the show is to put a pin in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciate your time. And I do feel like Barbara and I should take, we could just stay here for hours and challenge you on whatever you have in your library, like try to find stuff in your library. What other books does he have back there? Because he's got an extensive library. But Sam Black, thanks for being a part of today's show.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate you talking about documentaries, because I love documentaries too, and I haven't watched one in a long time, so I have to get back to that. I remember the last one that I enjoyed was about the beaches I think they were mostly on the East Coast, that were predominantly beaches that Black families could go to because they couldn't go to the white beaches. And now those same beaches have been gentrified. So they're not Black beaches anymore. They're like where the rich and famous want to go.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I thank you for reminding me about the value of documentaries, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Sure, and thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, great talking with you.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara, I would say I'm just always so grateful when we do these podcasts, because it expands my experience and my knowledge. And today, I think for me, the real takeaway was what Sam said about the psychological block that so many Americans have against learning something about somebody who's different than themselves. And, it's easy as a white person to say, well, Black History Month, that's not for me. And, I hope people who listen to this, of all colors and races and ethnicities will walk away and say that, no, this is, it's a part of our American experience, and it's part of all of our history, and we should take some time to, some deliberate time to focus on it this month. So.
Yeah, and also think about in a city like Pittsburgh, where We have a Black population. We have a growing African population, a growing Latino population, growing Asian population, that there's a lot of intersections in those histories as well. So I know Sam mentioned that as well. So I think good things for us to think about, and all of us can definitely think about how we can learn more.
Yeah. Well, thanks to both of you. Today's show was produced by Eddie Robas here at the Center for Media Innovation, and Among Neighbors is available wherever you listen to podcasts, and it's also available at centerformediainnovation.org. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.